So welcome to this presentation. My name is Eddie Enova and I will be your guide as we go through irritable bowel syndrome, this condition, IBS. Now, before we get into it, a little bit of a disclaimer. None of the things I talk about or recommend in this takes the place of medical advice. This is very general in nature, this presentation. So some of this may be absolutely relevant to you, some of it may not be. As with most complex sort of chronic conditions or syndromes like IBS, they are multi-causal. There are many factors involved, and to understand what is going on with your IBS, it's important to consult with a qualified health practitioner and look at your body, your health, your struggles, and what you need to do to get it under control. But hopefully in this presentation and the information that we explore is going to absolutely have an impact on you and your life and your bowel habits. I know this. So I just want to get that out of the way first. So in this presentation, we are going to go for a little bit of a deep dive into this condition. We're going to have a look at the factors that aggravate it, can trigger it, and can also make it better as well. We're going to have a really big deep dive into the role of the human stress response, so the nervous system and how this impacts your digestive system. Anybody who suffers with IBS more than likely knows how stress impacts that. Our tummies are the most beautiful barometer of our stress levels. And so I want you to really deeply understand how that works. So you can see this condition, IBS, has a huge nervous system component. And I would even go as far to say is that it's not even a digestive system issue. Although the digestive system is an issue, it's not the issue. The nervous system, and in particular, the autonomic nervous system, which we'll explore, I believe, is the key player when it comes to IBS and a key player in getting it under control as well. So we will go for a really deep exploration into that. At the end of the presentation, I will present to you a program that I have for IBS and how to master an 8-week program. But we'll talk about that right at the end. That may be relevant to you. And if it is, fantastic. You can reach out to me. We can have a chat about that. So before we get into the juicy content, what I want to do is take you for a little bit of a stroll through your digestive system, because the deeper you understand how the digestive system works, when we get to these more complex concepts, polyvagal theory and stress response and how that influences your digestive function, it's going to make a lot more sense. So we're going to do some foundational work first. I'm going to take you for a little bit of a stroll through your digestive system. So bear with me. Technology isn't my strong point, and it's been playing some games with me. So here we go. Beautiful. It's working. Okay, so let's start with the digestive system. So let's track food as it goes through our digestive system and how your digestive system interfaces with food. So eating and digestion starts not even in the mouth. It actually starts with the eyes and the nose, so the senses. So when we see the food that we're preparing, or we're smelling the food that's being prepared for us, this starts the whole digestive process off. The juices start flowing, the saliva starts to flow, and it gets ready for food. So I suppose the trap in the modern world is that we are very time poor. Just this morning when I was driving to the clinic, I saw someone at the traffic lights scoffing down some cereal or something that was in a bowl in his hand on his way to work. Now, it doesn't give the digestive system a huge amount of time to prepare for food. So no doubt that man's probably going to become a bit of a trumpet later on. He's probably going to start bloating and burping and farting and all sorts of stuff. So with food, food is a process. Food has always been historically something that we do in a social setting. We break bread with our friends, our family. There's a lot of connection involved, and a big part of it is the preparation. So it helps get the digestive system awake. So it starts with the eyes, it starts with the nose, and then food eventually makes its way to our mouth. Now, in the mouth, we obviously have teeth, which basically chew it up and start to break this food up to increase surface area for specific enzymes to act on this food and start breaking down, in particular the carbohydrates that get digested in the mouth, believe it or not, or start digesting in the mouth. In our saliva, we have an enzyme called salivary amylase. And amylase, anything that ends in ASE, ASE is an enzyme. And salivary amylase is a carbohydrate digesting enzyme. So that starts the process. We break up that food. We start to chew it down into some form of semi-liquid that increases surface area. These enzymes start to digest on it, and then we swallow. And so it goes down our esophagus, down into our stomach. Now, in our stomach, we have very, very strong acid. Through millions of years of evolution, our body has evolved hydrochloric acid in our tummies in these big sacs that you can see on the screen there. Now, the pH of hydrochloric acid is somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5. Very, very strong. Now, you can buy hydrochloric acid in bottles, use it in swimming pools. You can use it to get oil off your driveway. You pop it onto a wooden table, it's going to start to eat into the table. It's that strong, which is really crazy considering that it's inside a little tissue sac within our abdomen, a soft tissue sac. So that stomach makes all sorts of compounds, mucus, which has alkaline nature to it to protect these soft tissues. So this hydrochloric acid can mash together with all that food and form a very, very fine liquid, which is again all about increasing surface area for some more digestive processes that happen more inside the small intestine. So its role is to mix with stomach acid and make a super fine liquid, almost like a soup. They call that chyme. Okay, chyme, C-H-Y-M-E, it's called. So this liquid soup is still incredibly acidic. And now this liquid soup gets squeezed out of the stomach once it's ready and the stomach is satisfied that the job is done. It will squeeze it into our small intestine, as it connects to the bottom of the stomach. Now, the small intestine is a very long tube. It's about 22 foot long. It's pretty crazy that you can have 22 feet of tube shoved into your abdominal space. Now, it's all crinkled up and you've got the beautiful villi, which are like these finger-like projections which protrude into the middle of that tube. And this is where that chyme brushes up against and we start to absorb food in. There's also more enzymes on those villi, microscopic enzymes that help to break down certain sugars like fructose. And essentially, it's all about getting food ready for absorption through these villi. Now, that chyme coming out the tummy is incredibly acidic. Now, generally, the pH of the small intestine is incredibly alkaline. Got a pH, believe it or not, of about 8 or 8.4, somewhere around there, which is very, very different to the chyme. Now, the issue can be, if you imagine this beautiful alkaline environment with these stable villi, finger-like projections ready for absorption, and then you get this acid flowing through, what do you think happens to these villi? They get flared up, they get swollen, they get fried, they shrivel up, they swell up. So all that surface area that you would usually have around all these villi, instead of having all the surface area, if you were to open it up, it's about the size of a tennis court to absorb through. They puff up and they clump together, and now you've only got the surface area over the top, if you can see what I'm doing to my fingers. So you've lost a lot of digestive absorption capacity. So you can be eating the best diet in the world, yet maybe not all of that's actually getting into your body. So how does the body deal with this super acidic chyme coming out the tummy? Well, that, believe it or not, is the role of, or one of the roles of the pancreas. Now, the pancreas does lots of things. It produces digestive enzymes to further break our food down and absorb it and make the most of it. So the pancreatic enzymes, but it also produces something very, very relevant to what we're talking about called bicarbonate. So bicarb soda, just the same as the stuff that you've got in your cupboard and you probably clean tiles and silverware, and it seems like bicarb soda does everything. It's a little bit of a panacea, but your pancreas produces bicarbonate of soda. And one of its main role is to alkalize that acidic chyme that's coming out of the tummy as it traverses through the intestinal tract. So one of its jobs is to alkalize that so we don't fry everything on the way through. So a pretty important job, and that's how that pH gets up to that 8, 8.4. So the pancreas also produces insulin, produces glucagon, which all help to regulate your blood sugar levels, bring them up, bring them down, and create some sort of what science calls homeostasis, balance within the body, which is all important. All your cells, all your tissues always are trying to maintain this beautiful innate sense of balance. Homeostasis, it's called. As soon as we deviate away from homeostasis, there are problems. We experience problems. They're called signs and symptoms. But what the signs and symptoms actually are is your body's feedback mechanism communicating back to you, the organism, to make some changes to bring balance back into place. So health is balance. Digestive health is a balanced, healthy digestive system. Hope that makes sense. So what's the next stop on the train line of the digestive system? We've got the pancreas, we've got the liver there. You can see the liver on the left. It's a big organ. It's a very, very busy organ, the liver. So it metabolizes, all of our toxins, all of our food, all of our chemistry that we absorb through our skin, through our lungs, through our digestive system. It ends up in the bloodstream, and it's like the filter for the blood. It has very, very powerful enzyme pathways, which break all these things down, drugs, everything, and pulls out what it doesn't want, excretes it into the bile, which it produces. That bile then gets stored in the gallbladder. So the role of the gallbladder is it's a storage vessel. And so you get all that bile and all that toxicity stored up into the gallbladder. And then when this chyme is coming through the tummy, if there's a presence of fats in that food, there's certain cells just outside the tummy in the small intestine, the very first part of the small intestine, that can sense fats in that food, in that chyme. So if you've been eating fats as part of that meal, there's a hormone that gets sent to the liver. It's called cholecystokinin. Okay, and what that does is that tells the liver to empty bile into the gallbladder, and it causes the gallbladder to squeeze, because one of the main roles of the bile that's inside the gallbladder is to emulsify fats. We are a water body. We're about 60, 65, 70% water, something like that. No one can really agree on that. But we are a water body, and so oil and water, fats and water doesn't mix. We've all done that experiment at school in the chemistry lab. So our body has to make those fats water soluble, and that's the role of bile. One of the major roles of bile is to coat these fat globules that are in that chyme to essentially make it water soluble. So the analogy that I always use is, think about when you're doing your washing up after a meal. Let's say you've had a meal and it's had some fatty oil on it, a nice big salad that's had olive oil drizzled all over it. Now you've got to clean the plates. Now, if you were just to get your sink in your kitchen and just fill it with water and try to scrub it all off, it's probably not going to do a lot for it. You're going to get oil and water, and the fat's going to sort of clump up and float on the top, and it's not really going to clean anything. So what do we add to it? We add the dishwashing liquid. The dishwashing liquid acts as an emulsifier. So the dishwashing liquid coats all those fat globules that are floating around in the water, makes it water soluble. So when we open up the drain, it can flow down into the waste. And so that's what bile essentially does with our fat. So we can then absorb that and get the nutrition from it, get the nutrients, the fat soluble nutrients that might be contained within it. So it's absolutely beautiful when you understand the human body, or you even just have a look at the human body, look at the science of it, the biology of it. It's absolutely phenomenal. These machines we drive around in are so complex and so perfect, and all these little these organs and their functions and the hormones and how they communicate, it's absolutely mind-blowing. So hopefully you're enjoying this and it's helping you to understand your digestive system. What's next? So we've got the liver, we've done that, we've done the pancreas, the stomach, we're doing the small intestine. Now, most absorption of nutrients happen in the small intestine. That's where it's all about. So it's really important that our small intestine is really healthy. And the things that keep it healthy are things like our bacterial balance, so our microbiome. We're going to explore that in a bit. So the microbiome is all the bacteria in our digestive system, and there's so much. We are more bugs than we are human. The human body is made of about 100 trillion cells. You've got about 10 times that amount on and in you. So every tube, every tissue is pickled in bacteria. We are literally more bacteria than human. We're just a big skin bag of bugs walking around. So the health of these bacteria is very, very important for our health. So we need to nourish the digestive process with fermented foods. I'm going to talk about all this sort of stuff soon. But we need to nourish these bacteria, give them food, prebiotics, which are the fibers in our diet that they can feed off, and they can produce beautiful compounds. Some of them produce vitamins, believe it or not. They produce all sorts of compounds that are very, very beneficial for our health, for our immune system, for our mental health, believe it or not. Our gut can affect our mental health. They produce hormones like serotonin. So most people consider serotonin the happy hormone. And most people would probably think that it's like a brain hormone. We experience happiness in our brain, but we don't. 95% of serotonin is produced in your gut, not your head. Crazy. So very, very important to have healthy, balanced gut function, and the microbiome, our bacterial balance. It's very important. Now, that bacterial balance can get out of whack. It's called dysbiosis, or we can get like a bacterial overgrowth. We're going to talk about SIBO soon, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. That can create a lot of problems. Many, many people with IBS have SIBO, and so we need to address that or test for it first, confirm that it's there, and then eradicate it with either natural or pharmaceutical means or a combination. But we'll talk about SIBO very, very soon. So the small intestinal tract, very important. Its main role is absorption, getting that beautiful nutrition and all those colors and fruits and vegetables in our diet into the body. Okay, so the stomach prepares it, the pancreas starts digesting it, but the absorption, the important part, happens in the small intestine. From there, the small intestine attaches onto the colon or the large intestine, which is about 5 foot long. So you can see on the screen, it goes up, over the screen, horizontally, down and out. Now, the colon's got a very, very important job too. Not a lot of absorption happens. The main absorption that happens in there is water, believe it or not. So one of the roles of the colon is fluid balance within the body. So if we don't drink our water, the colon goes, right, we need water. Where are we going to get it from? Let's try suck it out of the stool. So that chyme, as it travels through, water starts to get dragged out of it. It gets a little bit harder. It starts to form feces, which poo. So a really important role of the colon is water balance. So if we don't drink, we get this really hard feces going on, constipation, essentially, where I'm going with this, this concept here. So we also produce certain vitamins in the colon. So we need lots of fluid, lots of fiber to push this through. Ideally, we should be having multiple bowel movements every day. Fortunately, it's not the case for some people. They go once a week. And obviously with IBS, it can be very erratic, swinging from constipation predominantly into diarrhea, a combination of both, swinging back and forth. You can have IBS-C, which is a constipation predominant IBS, where you tend to stay more constipated than the looser stools. You can have the opposite as well, more diarrhea-based IBS, where you stay more dominant diarrhea, or you can have a mix of that, or a sort of an IBS doesn't really suit either of those categories. There's different sorts if you had to classify them. I'm a naturopath, so I don't really like to stick a huge amount of names on things. What I'm looking at is the organism that's sitting in front of me, i.e. you. What's going on in this human's life, this organism's life, what's going on in this organism's body, and how do we bring homeostasis back to the system? So a more holistic view of the body. Generally, unfortunately, with IBS being a syndrome, whenever you hear the word syndrome, it really means that medicine doesn't really have an idea of what's going on with it. It's usually multi-causal, and that's where medicine sort of struggles a little bit with multi-causal chronic complex diseases. I would put, autoimmune conditions in that category, like IBS and Crohn's. I would put IBS in that as well. Cancers, things like that, they don't do overly well because it doesn't suit their medical model, which is one treatment for one disease. And when you start looking at humans, there can be many factors that make up, let's say, your IBS, that Joe Blow next door has IBS as well, but he has different factors that cause his. So we have to take an individualized approach. What's causing your IBS? So let's keep moving. I can waffle sometimes, just warning you if you haven't realized already, and I can get off track, but that's usually where the fun stuff comes out, of the juicy stuff. Right, so let's have a look at this thing called IBS, causes and risk factors. So it's 2 to 3 times more likely in women, which I find very interesting. I wonder why that is. There are hormonal influences. I think also stress plays a big role on that. Women have a lot of pressures on them, especially if they are balancing, looking after a family unit, the kids, also trying to drive for a career because they want some meaning and purpose outside of family. I think they can have a lot of stress on their plate, more so than men that can potentially channel their stress into one thing a bit more effectively. Whereas women have this more diffuse awareness where you're fantastic at doing lots of things at once, but that can be very stressful in that. So maybe that's part of it, maybe not. So it affects almost 20% of Australians. They are probably conservative numbers. These are reported numbers. There are probably a lot of people that suffer in silence with most things. We don't like to seek help. So stress, depression, so the mental health issues absolutely are a huge risk factor and cause for this. We're going to look at that really deeply very soon in polyvagal theory and how this impacts gut function through stress. I think you'll find that fascinating. Help you understand it to a really deep level. And honestly, if you get this, which you will, it's my job to, hopefully I do it well, you will understand the human stress response better than your GP, better than most psychologists, believe it or not. Okay, it's a pretty big call there, but it's true, unfortunately. So I look forward to presenting that bit to you very soon. In some cases, eating specific foods can trigger this. So the dairy allergens, or sorry, dietary allergens, dairy, eggs, wheat, sometimes citrus fruits for some people. Certain cases, caffeine can be a big gastric irritant or small intestinal irritant, bowel irritant. Alcohol is one as well. Can run in families, whether there's a genetic cause to it or not, but there can be, as we'll look soon, the role of multi-generational trauma and stress and how this influences your bloodline and how it may manifest in your family, yet it may not have any genetic component to it whatsoever. So predisposition because of circumstantial and coping strategies that are passed down rather than a gene that can cause this. Okay, there's certain drugs that can absolutely do this as well. So the PPIs, this is proton pump inhibitors. What these things are acid blockers. So they're used for reflux essentially, and it drops that beautiful hydrochloric acid, which has been evolving for millions and millions and millions of years, from a very, very strong acid to very alkaline. So it blocks it by about 90%, your acid production. So that can cause problems. That causes you not to digest food well. That can cause fermentation in your intestines and the bloating and the acid production that can happen. It can cause the bacterial overgrowth, SIBO. The PPIs, Somac, Losac, Nexium, examples of these are not designed to be long-term drugs. They are short-term drugs, designed to help get on top of a problem. But I consult with people that have been on it for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years plus sometimes on these drugs. They have a lot of nasty side effects like osteoporosis, dementia. So if you are taking one, if you've been on for a while, you need to have a really good conversation with your GP on how to get off that and start to look a little bit deeper into your condition so we can resolve it so you don't need those drugs. If you're getting reflux, you're getting reflux for a reason. It's not just about blocking the stomach acid. The stomach acid is not the problem. NSAIDs, what are these? These are non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, typically like Nurofen. These things aren't good for the stomach lining. They can cause problems, ulceration, bacterial overgrowth in the tummy, H. pylori, which is the little bug that causes stomach ulcers, and this can then form a sequelae of events through your digestive system, just like the PPIs, and ending up in irritable bowel syndrome. So if you're having to resort to these long term, then you don't want to be patching up symptoms in the body. We need to have a look at why that is. If there's a pain issue, we have to look at why is the pain there, what's going on, is it functional, is there something that can be done surgically, or are there psychological components as well to pain? Generally, it's a little bit of everything, always multi-causal typically with human health. Hormones. Mentioned this before. Menstruation frequently triggers and exacerbates, makes worse IBS symptoms, while pregnancy and menopause can tend to improve symptoms, which is quite interesting. Hormone replacement therapies associated with increased risk, so pumping more hormones into the system can sometimes trigger this off. Let's keep moving. What's next? So let's have a look at some of these physiological drivers of IBS. So mentioned diet. There are certain dietary allergens that can cause some problems. So on the next slide, I think I've got some dietary stuff. I'm going to go through each of these points. So we've got the allergens. So before we get into these, I just want to discriminate between allergen and intolerance. They're very, very different. Okay, sometimes they get lumped into the same basket. We talk about them in the same way, and that's not correct. So the allergens is an immunological response. The immune system is involved. Which means this offending factor, this offending food has entered the body and your body's launched a response against that. This is a systemic response. And quite often the allergic reactions aren't digestive system symptoms. They're actually like neurological symptoms. You see this with kids, with a dairy allergy, and it affects their mood and their behavior quite drastically sometimes. If you've got kids, you know what I mean. They can be quite sensitive to certain foods and additives and things like that. But there's an immune response. It's the big hallmark of that. And intolerance doesn't have necessarily that immune response, and it's not systemic. It's more localized. It's in the gut. So you get lots of gut symptoms, the bloating, the inflammation, the diarrhea, the constipation, what have you. So the major dietary allergens are dairy. Dairy is just cow food. It's not human food. I know we all have drunk it. It's in all the supermarkets. There's whole aisles, dedicated to this stuff, but it's not a human food. We can drink it. And the thing is, if it's not a big point here that's really, really important to ram home, is that an allergen is only an allergen if your body reacts to it. So you can do allergy testing. I can organize that for you. And if you don't react to dairy, then it's not an allergen for you. If you don't react to gluten or eggs, it's not an allergy for you. But these are the typical ones that most people have issues with. And historically, if you have a look at the sort of evidence, these are the very common dietary allergens. The primary dietary allergens, the worst ones, the number one is dairy. Just look at a cow. It's a ruminant. It's got 4 stomachs. It's a beast. Its digestive system is huge compared to our little piddly digestive system with 1 stomach. And most people's stomachs don't work overly well because we're stressed or taking the PPIs. And this beast has 4 stomachs. It's got massive digestive capacity. And so it's a very complex food, and is probably a little bit too complex for humans. And that's why we react to it. Eggs, some poorly farmed chickens. So these caged eggs, these ones that are on a grain predominant diet to fatten them up or just to keep them alive, to keep laying, they can be quite allergenic, the white in particular. Your backyard chooks that you have, or you may have, or your friends have, usually the part of the family, they usually eat better than the actual family themselves. They get all the beautiful scraps and the skins of the veggies where all the nutrition is, and they've usually got a fantastic diet. They are less allergenic, very nutritious, less allergenic. Other bird eggs, quails, duck are less allergenic again, but obviously not so common to get your hands on. Then you have the secondary dietary allergens. They were the primary ones. The secondary are less severe, okay? And this is where wheat comes into the picture. It can be an allergen for you. If you suspect it, you can do elimination diets where you remove it totally, come back to a healthy baseline. You need to be off for about 2 weeks to get your antibodies and immune system to calm down to a point where you can then introduce a little bit of one food and see what your body does. Watch and wait. The thing with allergies is that they can take a while to manifest. They can be a delayed hypersensitivity. Take 2 to 4 days before it manifests in your body. So you eat milk on a Monday, you don't react till Wednesday, but I guarantee before Wednesday, you've eaten it again, probably on Tuesday, if it's part of your regular diet. And so then that food that you've taken is reacting on Thursday. And so you're just constantly reacting and it becomes your normal. You don't really understand until you do these elimination challenges. Or if you're not interested in doing that, you can just do some allergy testing, some blood work, and you can shine a light on what you react to very, very quickly. That's always an option if you suspect that. So the intolerances are mainly in the gut. And so people that have intolerances, a very common style of eating is a low FODMAP diet. So what is FODMAP? It's a strange acronym. Stands for fermentable oligosaccharide, disaccharide, monosaccharides, and polyols. What the hell are they? They are sugars. They are carbohydrates. Okay, so whenever you see saccharide, it essentially means sugar. So you've got complex sugars and you've got more basic sugars, but they're fermentable. That's the key word there. And when our bacteria in our gut, mate, let's say with a little bit of bacterial overgrowth, they can start to ferment these sugars like crazy. And the byproducts of fermentation, there's 3 main byproducts of fermentation. You've got acid formation. That's an acidic process fermentation. So there's acids form. Many of these bacteria in our gut are lactobacillus bacteria, those probiotics that you buy at the pharmacy and your naturopath gives you. Lactobacillus, there's lots of different funky names, different species of them, but the lactobacillus are lactic acid forming. So when they start to have a party on this food and these fermentable oligosaccharides or sugars, they start to do what they do, which is produce more acids. What does that do to that beautiful alkaline pH of your intestinal tract? Starts to lower it, gets more and more acidic, which makes it more temperamental. Okay, so we don't want that. We don't want fermentation. We don't want acidity within the intestines. So if we have too many of these and we're not doing well with the FODMAPs, we go on a low FODMAP diet. Plenty of information out there. If you need some information on that, I can shoot you some if you want. Just shoot me an email. There's also, what am I going to say? There's, yeah, so it basically flares up. So you've got the throat, stay on track here. First symptom of fermentation, lactic acid. Second, gas. You get acid, you get fermentation, there's bubbles. We ferment, things to make booze. If you've got a beer maker in the family, there's bubbles involved. We make bubbles. How do we experience bubbles? Burps, farts, distension. So depending on where along that 22 foot of small intestine that fermentation is happening, depends on how we're going to experience that. So the upper third, typically you get a back pressure. You go up and out, that can cause reflux, that can cause burps. If it's in that middle third, it can get trapped. You're going to distend. You're going to get that painful pregnant belly that you can't burp up, you can't fart out. It's just stuck. It's not nice. Or if it's in the bottom third into the colon, you become the human trumpet. Lots of flatulence goes on. It can happen the whole way through at the same time as well, depending on where your bacteria are out of whack and how much fermentation is going on. So we've got lactic acid is the first thing that fermentation produces. You've got the bubbles, you've got the gas formation, and then the last one is alcohol production. So we become little distilleries, and these fermentable sugars produces alcohol. So this typically happens at night. When we go to sleep and the digestive system slows down, we ferment overnight, and it produces alcohol, which we absorb back in through the colon. How the colon can suck water back in, it can bring alcohol over into the bloodstream as well, which goes straight to our liver, and you can wake up feeling really yucky. So one, you can have super vivid dreams. And two, you can wake up feeling hungover, like literally hungover, from anywhere from mild to really severe, and you haven't even drunk. I've had many people say, I feel like I've been drinking the night before. I don't drink. What's going on? And I say, well, you do drink. You drink your own booze. You've got a little distillery going on at night because of this fermentative process. So we have to regulate that. We need to get that stomach acid as strong as possible. We need to get that intestinal tract as alkaline as possible, and we need to decrease the fermentable sugars in our diet. And this can help. It helps about 86% of people, believe it or not. So that's pretty high numbers. Just if you do only one thing from this whole presentation, have a look at a low FODMAP diet for your IBS, and you're probably 8 times out of 10 are going to get a impact or a significant impact for you. So there are certain irritants within the diet. And unfortunately, there's a lot of good stuff on the list. Look, coffee, tea, alcohol, chocolate, cola, not really cola fan, sugar, alcohols. These can make a really big part of most people's diets. The coffee, tea, they contain, they are a gastric irritant. You've got the tannins in tea and coffee as well. And that can get things moving. A lot of oldies rely on coffee to get their bowels moving in the morning. So obviously, if you've got IBS and you're drinking these things, it may be making things even worse. FCS is high fructose corn syrup. So fructose, especially if we don't tolerate fructose well, this is a fruit type sugar. It's typically made from corn, and it's the cheapest of cheap sugar, because corn can be grown in massive amounts and very easily made this super sweet stuff. It's used universally throughout food industry, and so we get a lot of it, especially in our crappy sort of junky foods, which I'm assuming if you're health oriented, you're probably not eating a lot of. But this high fructose corn syrup sometimes gets snuck in there as well, and we can ferment that quite badly, and that can cause problems too. Other irritants, as I said, there's some medications that can do it, and also some headache medications. Sorry. Why would I put that in there? So a lot of the headache medications are just paracetamol, but what they do is they combine it with caffeine, because caffeine can help open up the blood vessels, especially to the brain, and it can help with headaches, obviously. But the problem is the caffeine component for some people it can be a bit sensitive to, and it can cause some irritation. So there's some dietary components or physiological causes and risks there. Let's move on. Let's look at the microbiome side of things. So a recap of the microbiome, it's all our bugs. It's our population. Remember, you are more bacteria than you are human. We need to keep them happy. Our digestive system is pickled in bugs, good ones and not so good ones. But as with every tissue in the body, every system, homeostasis is key, balance. As soon as balance goes out, there's problems. Okay, so there's a few things around the microbiome that can cause the IBS or trigger it off. You can have infection. So you can have, especially immunocompromised people, let's say someone on chemotherapy or someone with some sort of condition where there's a immunosuppression, sometimes typically normal good bugs overgrow and they cause problems. They now become bad in a way. There's just too many of them, and this can start, creating imbalance and IBS type symptoms. As I've mentioned a couple of times now, overuse of certain medications, the PPIs is a notorious one for causing issues. The other one is antibiotics. Antibiotics are phenomenal drugs. They have saved trillions of lives, but they tend to get overused. And the issue with antibiotics is that they're non-specific. They don't care what they kill. They'll kill the good, they'll kill the bad. And so some of our good stuff gets killed. And then we end up with an imbalance, dysbiosis, imbalance between good and bad off the back end of antibiotics. So, a little bit of a trap there is that you're using it to control an infection, but in the process of using antibiotics, there's a little bit of an immune suppression happens through the gut, because about 80% of our guts and our intestines, that gets suppressed, and then we get the next infection. You see this with kids a lot, don't you? Parents out there, they go from one infection to the next, to the next, to the next, especially when antibiotics are involved. So we've got to support and protect the intestinal tract. You can do that while you're on antibiotics. You don't take antibiotics, so you take a non-pathogenic yeast called Saccharomyces boulardii. It's a good one, as long as you're not sensitive to it, and that can help line the gut and protect you from this kill-off effect of antibiotics. And then after antibiotics are out of the system, then you can repopulate with the good stuff, the bacteria, fermented foods, or probiotic maybe for a couple of bottles, and get your levels back up in healthy balance again. Fortunately, aging influences the microbiome. As we age, our stomach acid gets lower and lower. It's just part of aging. Our digestive power gets weaker and weaker, and then more inclined to bacterial overgrowth, candida infections, things like that we see in the aging population can create IBS. We can have low bacteriostatic digestive secretions. What does that mean? Bacteriostatic, something that stops bacteria growing. One of the big things is the hydrochloric acid. That acid in the tummy kills stuff. That's one of the roles of it. Is, most of the bugs that get into our system is through our mouth. It's on food, on dirty food. We're very clean these days, but we've got millions of years of evolution, essentially being cave women, that were very dirty. So a lot of bugs came in through the mouth. And so one of the roles of hydrochloric acid is to clean our food on the way through. Now, what's going to happen when you're getting older and your levels of hydrochloric acid are lower? And let's just say you're also getting old, you start to suffer from reflux because of that poor digestive secretions. And then your doctor gives you a PPI, that reflux drug. You've got no chance of cleaning that food. Got very little chance of digesting your food properly too, but you're letting this unclean food through, and then there can be infection or detrimental bacteria introduced into your small intestine, which can start an IBS process off for you potentially. Decreased migrating motor complex activity, MMC. What the hell is that, you say? So that is a part of the way that we move food through our digestive system, and it's how we do it when we're in a fasted state. So in between meals. So when we have food, obviously food is bulky, and we have muscular contractions that squeeze it all the way through. If in a tube with water, you'd have to squeeze it to move the fluid up. Then put the next muscular contraction, or squeeze. That's essentially what your digestive system does all the way through when there's food in the system. But when there's not food, we're not getting any sort of stimulus from food, we have this migrating motor complex activity, which also sweeps food through. Now, that also decreases with certain things like age, but also stress, and also certain digestive interventions like surgeries, things like that. Stress is a really big one there. Slows it all down. And so if we get a stagnant gut, that food contents that might be in there can start to ferment and create all these problems that we're talking about. And then bacteria overgrow, and we've got all sorts of problems. And this is this next point, which is really important to cover, called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And as the name implies, it's an overgrowth of certain bacteria in the small intestine to the point where it causes quite severe symptoms. I see SIBO, as we call it, the acronym, I see it as a more advanced form of IBS. We start with IBS, and if it goes untreated or poorly treated, sometimes it gets even worse, and we find ourselves with a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Now, the good thing is you can test for this. Certain bacteria overgrow and they produce hydrogen and methane, believe it or not. And you can do a certain special breath test that your GP could do or your naturopath could do. I can refer you for that, but try with your GP first. Medicare will cover it if you're in Australia. And you can diagnose, see if it's actually there or not. And then with that, if it is there, then you can obviously do something to eradicate these numbers and bring balance back to the system. So SIBO is a pretty big deal. Many people with IBS actually have SIBO or have SIBO very, very strongly present in the digestive system. So we need to address that. So it's not about throwing a probiotic out with some peppermint pills or something like that. We've actually got to go down and cull numbers. And the good thing about some of these tests is that we can test for it. We can also do another step up in testing called a microbiome mapping, which basically gives us a full understanding from lips to the other end, everything that goes on in there, all the bacteria, the good ones, the bad ones, parasites, all sorts of, sort of microorganisms, what your digestive system produces, the different compounds it produces and the levels of that. And it can give us a very deep understanding. And with all this information, we can make the best choices on your treatment path. So all these things are available. Right, next slide. What do we got? Now we're into the stress response. Now this is really, really important because I always talk about stress. I'm known for banging on about stress a lot because in my career, my own health journey, and also in my career as a naturopath for pretty much the last 15 years, I've consulted with hundreds, if not, well, absolutely hundreds, probably thousands of patients, hundreds of cancer patients, very, very chronically unwell patients, and lots of chronically unwell autoimmune IBS, all these sorts of things. The way that I work is that when someone comes to see me, is I give them this huge health questionnaire. Everyone hates doing it because it takes about 45 minutes, an hour to do. But the good thing about it, and it's basically in that questionnaire, it's every question you could potentially ask about every system in the body. And the reason why I do it is because I don't want to get someone in my office and then have to ask them all those questions. Boring as batshit for me, and it's boring for the patient as well. So I'd rather them fill that out at home and bring it in. Now, the benefit and why I tell you this is because when that person comes and sits down in front of me, I can actually put my pen down. I can put the questionnaire aside. I read it before they come in. So I already know, what's going on physiologically within the body. And then I can listen. I can listen to that person and understand what their life is like and what their life has been like, their biography. There's a famous saying by Carolyn Miss in her book, Anatomy of Spirit. She says, your biography becomes your biology. So we must listen to that human in front of us and understand what's going on for them, what's going on in their life, their marriage, their work, their career, what goes on inside that they never express to the world. This is where stress comes into it, because modern humans, we live pretty stressful lives. Genetically what we are, if you look at what we are, the last genetic adaptation through evolution was about 40,000 years ago. And that was for complex speech. Physiologically, the flesh suit that we drive around in hasn't changed whatsoever for hundreds of thousands of years. And so what is that hundreds of thousands of years, or let's just say 20,000 years old, what does that human look like? It's a Paleolithic human living a very different life to what the modern world lives. Look at what this world is. We've got the digital world, we've got the working world, careers, we've got trying to keep up with the Joneses with our 2.5 kids, our 4-wheel drive, the swimming pool, the picket fence in the house with the investment property as well. A lot of stress, a lot of stress. Now, old caveman Uncle Ugg, who I always talk about, your ancestor, he had a pretty chilled out life. Their working day of hunting and gathering, believe it or not, was 2 to 3 hours. So that's a 15 to 20 hour working week. Sounds amazing. Now, most people do at least 40, if not 60, 70 hours. Some people do. We have a lot of stresses on our plate, whereas Uncle Ugg didn't. He only had some big stresses, but short-term stresses. And this is the key point, is that the stresses in modern life aren't short-term. The long-term, chronic, persistent stress. We've got the finances, we've got the kids, we've got the marriage, we've got the career, we've got, if you listen to this in 2021, we've got COVID and all the restrictions and how that influences. We've got all these tigers in disguise, and we don't just have one. Back in the day, Uncle Ugg had pretty much just like one major stressor to deal with. He could deal with it, come back to baseline of his very chilled out life, get on with things until the next stress came along. We have one tiger, then the next, then the next, and then next. And we've got the stacks on, this pile of stress of tigers all over us. And our total stress levels can become very, very high. And medicine has a name for this: high stress levels. All these tigers in disguise, crowded on top of us. It's called allostatic load. So you take all your physical stresses, your mental, your emotional, your social, financial, familial stresses, put that into a basket, weigh the contents of that basket. It probably weighs a lot. That's your allostatic load. That's the wear and tear that it has on your system. Now, stress has a massive impact on one system in particular, and it's not the gastrointestinal system, it's the nervous system. And then the nervous system impacts your digestive system. And this is what I want to explore now through what's called polyvagal theory. Stephen Porges is the researcher who's came up with this theory, this framework, and it explains beautifully, very, very deeply how the human stress response works. And I want to take you through this, but I want to take you through this in the context of digestion, and hopefully it'll make a lot of sense for you. So let's do it. Before we get on it, what I wanted to do is down in the left-hand corner of this slide is that stress, it's a full body major physiological event. Okay, stress doesn't happen in the mind. It happens throughout the whole body. It happens in your digestive system. It happens in your immune system, in your ovaries if you've got them, in your testes if you've got them. It happens in your little toe. It's a full body major physiological and psychological event. And so it's not just stress. It's a really, really big deal. I want to show you how it's a really big deal. So if you haven't been taking it seriously as part of your life and also part of your IBS, hopefully you will now with this new understanding of that and some practical techniques on how we can start to work with that nervous system. So let's go. Before we get into the polyvagal, we're going to talk about what the actual vagal nerve is, because it's around, Porges's work is around the vagus nerve in particular, but there's different parts of that nerve, hence poly, which means sort of like many or multiple. So the vagal nerve is actually a little cranial nerve 10. So it erupts from our brainstem and it travels down through the chest, and you see not a lot of activity, not a lot of nerve endings. And then it gets down to the abdomen. And if you can see on this picture on the slide, look at all those nerve endings. Look at all that nervous structure in the abdomen. You can see it from the diaphragm down. There's a massive amount of nervous system there. Okay, some people call this the enteric nervous system. Enteric as in gut nervous system. Huge, isn't it? So even that picture alone makes you just go, wow, okay, there's a lot of nervous system presence in my digestive system. So it's the longest nerve of the body, the vagus nerve. They call it the wanderer. I think vagus or vagal, I think comes from a Latin root term that vaguely describes wanderer. So the vagus nerve is the major parasympathetic nerve. Now, for us to understand what that means, we have to talk about our nervous systems. We don't have just one, we have multiple, and we have multiple departments of these multiple nervous systems. So we have the central nervous system, which is our brain and spinal cord. And then off of that, we have the sympathetic nervous system, which erupts from essentially most of our back, our thoracic back, our lumbar spine, and all the nerve endings go out to mainly muscles. Okay, and you'll see why this is, because the sympathetic nervous system is the mobilized nervous system. It's the fight or flight nervous system. It's the ones that gears the body up for action. You feel energized, you feel stimulated. And then we have the opposite of that. It's called the parasympathetic nervous system. This is where the vagal nerve comes in. It's the main nerve in the parasympathetic nervous system. And its job is to calm the body down typically. So think of the sympathetic nervous system as the accelerator, foot flat to the floor in the car, makes it go flat out. And then we've got the brake, the parasympathetic, and it's how we have our ability to regulate our accelerator and our brake that helps us to regulate our nervous system in a healthy way. Now, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system is a division of the autonomic nervous system, the automatic nervous system. So the way that our body gears up and calms down without our conscious control. The blood vessels open and close. We don't tell them to do that. The thyroid doesn't produce hormone and not produce hormone because we tell it to. It knows how to do it because our nervous system drives the bus. The more you understand about this, the more you realize that we barely drive this flesh suit. We are in it, but we're along for the ride. It's really controlling it. So let's have a little bit more of an in-depth exploration of this vagus nerve and how it works. So we're going to look at stress. And to do this, I'm going to tell you a little bit of story about Uncle Lug again. Okay, so Uncle Lug, as I said, he had a pretty chilled out life. Most of his life was on, under a tree with 20 to 50 of his clan members or family, friends, a lot of social connection, quite a safe type life. And so most of his time, nervous system wise, was spent in what's called ventral vagal. It's the newest part of our nervous system. It's about 200 million years old, very, very old. But there's older parts which we're going to explore soon. And so when we're in the ventral vagal state, the key word is safe. So we feel socially engaged, we feel calm, we feel regulated. The body comes into homeostasis, into balance very, very easily. We want to engage in people. That's what a ventral vagal state looks like. It's where health is. It's where we feel good. We feel good and we feel like we want to engage with people and get the most juice out of life. And so this is the parasympathetic nervous system because it's the vagal nerve. Now, Toothy, the tiger, jumps out. So Uncle Lug's there, he's having a chat, but then suddenly saber-toothed tiger jumps out, Toothy, let's call her, and she's hungry. And so he's got two options. The next level of stress response that kicks in through the nervous system is our sympathetic nervous system. We've got to fight or we've got to run like hell. We need to survive. So the key word here for the sympathetic nervous system, which remember comes out from the spinal cord to most of our muscles, is mobilize. We've got to get away. We've got to ensure safety. Now, this is an older part of our nervous system. It's about 400 million years old, 200 million years difference. It's a long time. We've been around these bodies, whether it looked like this or not, or a very, very primitive, maybe didn't even look like a human body whatsoever. It's been around for a long time in evolution. So this is our fight or flight response. So what does it look like? We get hypervigilant. We're stimulated. We have boundless energy because we need to get the hell away from Toothy. Now, with digestive system wise, how does this relate to IBS? Is that for fighting and flighting, all resources needed to be diverted through not the parasympathetic nervous system, but the sympathetic, which services our muscles, doesn't it? To be strong, to be fast, to be quick. Reflexes. So we don't need digestive system. So all the resources, the blood supply constricts to our abdominal space and they get diverted or shunted out to the most important systems of the body for survival. And so we stagnate. Constipation kicks in because we don't need to be worrying about bowel movements when we're running and fighting tigers. Okay, the breath rate goes up, the heart beats fast, getting ready to mobilize. And so you may recognize this when you get stressed out, when you have to talk in front of a crowd, or the boss calls you in to have a chat and you don't know what it's about, or something else happens and you get into that stimulated hypervigilant response, anxious response. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a beautifully designed process through millions of evolution that is perfect. It's just when we use this response too much because we've got too many tigers in our life that we overuse this and it becomes a predominant way of being, which always hypervigilant. We can always be constipated, or we can always be breathing shallow. The stress breath is short, sharp, and shallow. We can carry a lot of tension, cramps, our jaws at night, grind our teeth. It's all symptoms of that sympathetic nervous system is too dominant within us. We've got too many tigers. So Toothy comes out, we run, but we get tired eventually. And Toothy's got better cardiovascular fitness than we do. And we get trapped up against a rock. And now the sympathetic nervous system is of no use anymore. We're tired anyway. So what happens is that we drop down into the deepest, oldest part of our nervous system, the next level of the stress response. And it's the freeze response. And it comes out of what's called the dorsal vagal. Now, the dorsal vagal part. So this is the very bottom part of that nervous system. So see in the picture in the middle of the screen, all that nervous system presence at the bottom of it. That's the diaphragm down, essentially, is what you're looking at there. That's the small intestine, that's the large intestine, that's the dorsal vagal. Now, when we go into that deeper stress response, so Toothy's got us up against that brick wall. Well, there's no brick walls back then, a rock, a boulder. We can't go anywhere. We haven't got the energy. We can't fight, we can't flight, so we freeze. It's the deepest, it's 500 million year old stress response. It's our very first stress response. Now, we didn't look anything like what we look like now with some sort of multicellular organism. And the only thing we could do when there was a predator-prey situation was to freeze. And hopefully, Toothy or the predator gets bored or something else catches her attention and she goes off and we survive. It's a last-ditch effort to survive. Now, to do this, the body needs to get calm. It's about conservation of energy. So we freeze. Energy drains from the system. We become chronically fatigued. So we can feel that in modern day. We can feel that exhaustion, that fatigue for no apparent reason, potentially. We disassociate psychologically because of the impending doom that's coming, the impending death, potentially, the pain of a tiger eating us. We can feel very overwhelmed, but it's a freeze response. And what happens within the digestive system is that it loosens up because that dorsal vagal gets innervated, it all goes to there and things loosen up and we flood. And so diarrhea kicks in. Now, if you've ever looked, a lot of people call the dorsal vagal the reptilian response or the reptilian brain, very deep part of our stress response. And if you've ever picked up a lizard, like in Australia, a bobtail lizard, have you ever picked one up? They poo everywhere. It's part of their freeze response, their dorsal vagal response, because what that does is designed to potentially disgust the predator. It's, again, a last-ditch survival effort. Disgust the predator. It doesn't want to eat anymore because I've swallowed myself or I've pooed everywhere. Now, humans do this as well. We get in extreme stress and we wet ourselves or the bowels go on us. So can you see how this might overlay into IBS? So where people with IBS are typically sitting, they've got a very sensitive stress coping regulation system, and they are bouncing between sympathetic nervous system and the dorsal vagal. So constipation, diarrhea, up and down, up and down. That's their default, is the bottom of this page, up and down. It's not the ideal place to be. The way we traverse up and down this hierarchy of stress is called self-regulation, our own ability to control our nervous system, which we can to a certain level through different sort of calming techniques, breathing techniques, meditations, yogas, exercises. There's lots of ways, art. There's lots of ways that we can learn how to traverse up and down this much, much more effectively. But for people that maybe aren't as skilled because they haven't been mirrored this to them through their upbringing, and it's just not in the narrative, we don't talk about this stuff enough. They can be sitting in these bottom two categories, the sympathetic nervous system down to the dorsal, and they go from there and down, and then you watch the bowels loosen up and then they constipate, they loosen up. Now, if you've got that type of IBS that predominates in one, the diarrhea, where do you reckon you're predominantly sitting in? Dorsal. Or a constipation dominant IBS, where are you sitting? Probably sympathetic. So hopefully this makes sense. I think I've explained it quite well. If you've got any questions on it, please reach out to me. If it doesn't make 100% sense. But the key point here is that we must be able to traverse this hierarchy effectively and healthily. So there's techniques to do this. I'm going to talk about some of these soon. So this is how stress influences our body, our health, in particular our digestive system. So let's move on. Okay, so typical treatments for IBS. A lot of people do some sort of diet of some sort. Maybe they don't. So we've looked at some things. I'm going to go through one of the next slides coming up is some practical advice for you. So things that we can actually do, the diet that I recommend. And we'll talk about supplements in a second. So a lot of people try some sort of elimination diet, might be a low FODMAP diet or a gluten-free diet. Your digestive system is the best barometer of what you're doing. It will tell you, it communicates to you in signs and symptoms. It tells you, I like this, I don't like this. So really tune into your body and understand its language, the language of the body, the signs and symptoms. Don't medicate them. The peppermint pill, the Movicol, the whatever it is that you got to take, to either loosen things up or help solidify things up. Don't medicate. Actually turn your attention towards the digestive system and say, what do you need? Try some diets. Start with this safe diet that I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. See how that impacts. That will impact probably 90% of people in really, really positive ways. If it doesn't, we may need to test a little bit deeper and understand what's going on. Okay, supplements, they can have a part to play. Now, it's not about pills and potions and lotions with human health. So many people come to me and they want the magic pill, something to make it go away because they're sick and tired of it and they just want it gone. The issue is that very, very, very rarely work, because what your body wants, the signs and symptoms, what they're actually calling for is change. So health creation and cultivation is about change. So meaningful change in our life. Now, that can be really tricky for humans because we are creatures of habit. We don't like to change. But if the body is calling for it, then we ignore that at our own peril. So what needs to change? Is it stress levels? Do we need to decrease our allostatic load, that total stress levels? Is it that we need to learn how to traverse the stress hierarchy better, learn how to control our breath, our mind, our anxieties if we have them, get in front of the right people to teach you this stuff? And if we do that, we create that beautiful foundation. Then if we want to use supplements, they will work even better. So there's specific strains of probiotics that work for IBS very, very well. It's not just about generalized probiotics or fermented foods. You can use strain-specific probiotics that help to calm the inflammation and the fermentation process within the small intestine. They can be life-changing for people. There's certain treatments that can help if stress is a big part of your IBS. Herbs are beautiful to help strengthen those pathways. The nervous system tonics, the adrenal tonics, that help us to cope better with stress, especially if we're doing the changes and learning our skill set training like breath work and meditation. They can be phenomenally effective as well. We can look at our lifestyles. What sort of life do we lead? Are we active? Are we not? What is our diet, which falls into that as well? Is it a crappy standard Australian diet, or are we actually being more health conscious? And there's certain medications. Sometimes if it's really extreme, the doctors can absolutely help with certain medications to calm things down while we work underneath that to get to the root causes. So you've probably tried lots of things. The reason why you're watching this is probably because your IBS isn't under control, but you've probably tried bucket loads of things. Most people have. By the time they come and see me, they've been down to the specialists. They've tried all the different probiotics. They've tried this, they've tried that with no success. So we need to look outside the box. We need to look more holistically like what we're doing in this presentation. So what are some practical ways we can help to manage, reduce, and hopefully eliminate your IBS? So the dietary approach, I like a really safe diet. So the FODMAPs, as we explored, can have a massive impact on you. 86%, people will benefit. So it's a no-brainer. Give that a go. So a low FODMAP, hypoallergenic. So looking at those dietary allergens and cutting those down, or if not out, as much as possible. What I also like to do while we're doing gut work is not rely on too much raw food in the diet. Raw food, especially in an irritated gut, in a balanced gut, can make things worse. So sticking to, believe it or not, just short term, a predominantly cooked diet while we're doing the work with the digestive system. You can take the burden off the digestive tract, give it a break so it can calm down, get some healing happening, and then we can slowly introduce those raw foods back in, because you want raw food in the diet, but you don't want 100% raw food diet. And when your guts are out of whack, get more soft cooked food that takes the burden off it so we can start to work with it. So that's my advice for dietary stuff. We can look at the microbiome. So typically, if you want to understand, testing, test. It's always the best way. Then we know exactly what we're dealing with. You can test for SIBO with the breath test. Your doctor can do that. I can refer you for that. Or you can do a microbiome mapping, which is that full test from lips to the other end, exactly how your digestive system is working. Your GP can't do that unless they're an integrative GP. I can if you want some support there to get that testing. And then we can understand exactly what we're dealing with. And with that knowledge, we can then make better choices rather than try a few things, doesn't work, go to the next thing or the next practitioner or the next supplement and just sort of shotgun approach it. We can get really specific. This is exactly what's going on. This is what we need to do. So there's always benefit in doing that. If SIBO is there, we can do some eradication protocols. So naturopathic medicine, we quite often call these weed, feed and seed protocols, where we cull the numbers, we weed it all out, we feed it back up, and then we seed it with probiotics. And so they can take 6-8 weeks to do that sort of type process. So that could be a potential if that's what's going on for you. Don't assume, test is my recommendation. We can use specific probiotics if that's needed. The test can show us what you're low in, what you're high in, and what we need to do. We can look at the pHs. Now, pH in the digestive system is all important. Remember that tummy needs to be super strong acid. Those intestines need to be super alkaline. So we can do a bit of pH modulation. So change those pHs, which allow the balance to come back in. Okay. We can look at the irritants, the things that can irritate you, and you'll know that pretty soon if it is or not. So the irritants, again, caffeine, alcohol, chocolate, sugar alcohols. What are they? These are the maltitols, the xylitols. You see these in toothpaste, you see these in diabetic lollies, you see these in weight loss products, you see these in protein powders, okay? Now, they are intensely sweet, but they have no caloric signature, no calories to them. So they're low calorie, low carbohydrate. Now, they are intensely sweet, but if you have too much of them, they act as a laxative. I've done that before. I used to work in a pharmacy many, many years ago. There were diabetic lollies there. I was like, oh, you can eat lollies and not get the sugar. Fantastic. You only do that once. Eat a whole packet of, I can't remember what it was, something, on the loo pretty quickly and stayed there for quite a long time. So be careful of the sugar alcohols, the ols, xylitol, maltitol, erythritol. You're going to be a little bit careful with these. So check your food labels, people. High fructose corn syrup, read your labels again. If it's there, you may be a problem for you. If you're on medications like the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, you're taking Nurofen, you're relying on it too much, you need to get to the bottom of that. Nurofen long-term is not a good medication. You'll end up with gastritis, potentially ulcers, and that can lead to stomach cancers in the long term. So you do not want that. Trust me on that one. PPIs, the antacids, the Losec, the Nexiums, the Somax, the reflux drugs. If you've been on them for any longer than probably 6 months, then you need to act on that. Speak to your GP and try to get them to look a little bit deeper into why you need these drugs. If they're not willing to, sack your GP, get a better one. Any GP that really cares about your health long term, your dementia risk, osteoporosis, will not allow you to be on these for long periods of time. They are fantastic short-term drugs. I've been on them myself when I was going through chemotherapy. I needed that because I had gastritis from the steroids. They were an absolute treat, but I come off them as soon as, the steroid, which was the cause of it, I wasn't taking that. I didn't need it anymore. So work with someone that can help you get to the cause of what the issue is. Don't rely on PPIs. And remember those headache medications if you get headaches. The caffeine component could be causing problems. Now, the polyvagal side of things, the stress component, what can we do there? Retraining the nervous system is really, really important. If you have a really big stress component to your IBS, it impacts it. I want to introduce you to a different way to think about your IBS. Now, I've called IBS post-traumatic stress gut. So it's PTSD of the gut. Okay, and this is why the nervous system has gone through something stressful or stressful things, particularly early in life, traumas, childhood, adverse events, things like this, and it's developed a way of coping. This is our stress coping strategy that we have. You do stress a certain way, and you do it different to me, and you do it different to your partner, and Joe Blow down the road, but you've learned how to do that through experiences in your life. Sometimes those experiences need to be sorted out because we're still running out of those old belief systems, those old adaptations. Dad used to beat me. I had to be seen and not heard. I had to shut myself up and I needed to repress my emotions. There's a coping strategy, a stress coping strategy. Okay, I know that one very, very well. Now, that in your adult life probably doesn't serve you because you internalize your stress. And then through that polyvagal thing that we looked at, that we then get this huge stress response within the gut, a PTSD of the gut, and it creates a huge problem. Now, is the gut the problem? No. Is the nervous system the problem? Yes, it is. But why is the nervous system doing what it's designed to do to keep you safe through that adaptation, we need to clear that stuff up. That's the deepest of deep work. That's trauma-based work, which I do through compassionate inquiry. If you need help with this stuff, please reach out. Clearing that relationship you had to your early childhood traumas and looking and understanding your adaptations, the way that you do things, the way that you do stress is very, very important so you can unlearn those behaviors. Because if you keep doing the same old thing, you're going to keep getting the same outcome. Einstein told us that, his definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again, expect a different result. We cannot do that. We have to change. And it's the relationship to what happened to us is what we have to change. So that's very, very deep level work. Not everyone's up for that, to be honest, because it means facing our pain, facing the painful aspects of ourself, what we've been through, and actually stepping back into that to help heal it. And some people don't want to do that. And I get that. But if you want to do that, please reach out. Compassionate inquiry, the technique that I do through Gabor Mate, it's a very, very powerful technique. It gets you to the core of what's going on and help you to change that relationship very, very quickly. So I'm up about that. But our nervous system, we can retrain this stuff. Okay, we can become masters of our nervous system. The way we traverse that hierarchy of stress, we can develop a skill set on how we do that. So we can tone the vagal nerve. So what we want to do is spend more time in the upper part of that image. Remember the ventral, then the sympathetic, then the dorsal. We want to spend more time in the top two, not the bottom two. If you're in the bottom two, you've got some work to do to get up into the top tiers. Like a ladder, you got to climb back up. So how can we start that process? One, the deep work that I talked about before is important to clear the palate. So whatever skill set you do will be more successful. Two, we can actually utilize our nervous system through something very, very simple. It's called the breath. Okay, your breath is part of your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And your breathing apparatus, your respiratory system is very, very different to most other systems in your body, is that you can have conscious control over it. There's no other system that can do that. You can't go, right, nervous system, I'm driving the bus now, thank you very much. T cells go do that, natural killer cells go do that. Okay, come back in. You can't do that. But you can with the breath. You can slow your breath down. You can speed your breath up. And this does different things to your nervous system through the vagal nerve. So if you're finding yourself down in dorsal vagal and sympathetic, when you're in sympathetic fight or flight, your breath is fast, short, sharp, and shallow. Slow it down. Learn how to slow your breath. 5 seconds in, 8 seconds out. Okay, so when you breathe in for 5 seconds, count in your mind, but as you breathe in, get your belly to poke out. Remember all that nervous system in your belly, from your diaphragm down, we need to stimulate that. So the belly needs to go out as we breathe in. It feels counterproductive, but it's actually the way we're supposed to breathe, believe it or not. So as you breathe in, belly goes out, count 5 seconds in. And it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. And then out breath, rolling breath, and no space at the top, no space at the bottom, just in and out and in, nice and calm and gentle. 8 seconds out, long, slow out breath. Your out breath is predominantly parasympathetic nervous system driven. Remember the calming part of it. So it's all about the out breath. Don't do these other styles out there that are all aggressive in breath. That's a different style of breath work for you. Not ideal if you've got IBS, not ideal. What we want to do is the slow, long, out breath dominated parasympathetic nervous system dominant breath work. And that's all it is. It's breathing in a different way. You're going to breathe every day. You take many, many breaths every minute. And every minute you probably take somewhere between 10 and 15 breaths. That's not a healthy rate. A healthy rate is between 5 and 6 breaths a minute. To do that, it's a 5 second in breath. A 5 second out breath is 6 breaths a minute. I like 5 and 8 out. I like a longer out breath, especially for stress. And this is how you start to tame your nervous system to the breath. So start doing that. You can sit down. It can be a meditation itself. Sit down and just breathe like that. Set a 10-minute timer on your phone. 10 minutes goes quite fast when you're doing active breathing. And so you got your timer counting down and just focus on your breath. Feel it. Feel all the nuances of the breath, the movement, the up and down, the rising, falling, all that stuff. But just control your breath. And then what I like to get people to do is when they're driving, most people have to drive 10 to 20 minutes somewhere and 10 to 20 minutes back, whether that's dropping the kids off to work or whatever it might be. There's the potential for 20 to 40 minutes of breath work every day without impacting your time restraints or trying to find time for it at all. You're going to breathe anyway on the way to work, and you're going to breathe on the way back. Why not slow it down? You don't need your eyes closed for breath work. Okay, definitely don't close your eyes while you're driving. Very important point. So just slow it down. Do it through the nose. Breathe through the nose. Nose is for breathing, mouth is for eating. So breathe slow and long through the nose, and start training your breath so that's your default breath. Okay, not the stress breath, the short, sharp, shallow, sympathetic nervous system stress breath. We don't want that as your default. We want the slow, long breath as your default. So start doing this in the car. It's a great way to do it. You can also learn things like meditation, mindfulness, very powerful techniques to get on top of the mind and on top of the nervous system as well. You can do resilience training. What is that? These are things that put a stressor on your nervous system, and then you have to try to hold your own in the face of the stress. So no tigers, but I'm talking about things like a sauna, the heat, and how you conduct yourself in the heat. Do you sit there panting and whinging and sweating, obviously, but panting and not controlling your breath? Or do you sit there and control your breath? Strong. Ice bath is another one. I do a lot of ice bathing workshops with people, and you hop into -7 and the breath wants to go on you, but you don't. You hold it back and you stay with your 5 in, 8 out in the face of extreme stress, in this case, very, very cold. Now, you don't need to go start ice bathing. You can just start doing little bursts of cold in your shower. So have your nice warm shower, get yourself all nice and clean, scrub your bum, do all your stuff, and then at the very end, give it a burst of cold for maybe 10 seconds or just a little bit cold, and then start to get it colder and colder for longer and longer. But the key is, in that stress, in that cold, keep your breath calm. Keep your physiology as calm as possible. The shivers trying to come in, control the shivers, control the breath, control your nervous system. And that's training. And so when life throws you the next tiger, you've got more of a chance of holding your physiology, holding your calmness in the face of the storm, if that makes sense. That's resilience training. The human body likes to do hard things. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. The problem is we live very soft, easy, fluffy, cotton candy lives. It's not what our bodies used to. Through millions of years of evolution, there were tough times, there were famines, there were cold snaps, there were floods, there was all sorts. So we need to challenge our body. And when we challenge, the body gets stronger, it gets resilient, and our nervous system gets more resilient, so we don't chop and change up through that hierarchy of stress, up and down, causing problems with our bowels. I hope that makes sense. As I mentioned before, we can also use herbs. Herbs are beautiful for the nervous system, the adrenal system, the nervous system tonics. These are adaptogenic herbs that help our body to adapt to stress better, to be more resilient, especially when you do it in the context of all this other stuff that we're talking about. This is how you get over these chronic complex syndromes or diseases, is that we take this multi-pronged, multi-causal, multi-treatment approach. We look at our traumas and our perceptions. We deal with the nervous system and train it up. We look at potentially herbs and probiotics. We change our diet. We decrease our allostatic load, our stress levels, and we start to interface with stress better. We change the chemistry of our life. And funnily enough, the chemistry of our body changes as well. Okay. It's not easy. I know it'd be nice if there was just a magic pill, but there's not, unfortunately. There is one magic pill. That's you. You are the magic pill. You make the changes, your body will reward you for it. If you need help, please reach out, because I'll guide you through that. So that's pretty much the presentation. Just to finish off, I'm just going to introduce you to a program that I have. This is the shameless plug at the end. Hopefully that you've gained some real benefit from this presentation. You understand the IBS, that you may suffer even deeper, and have some practical tools that you can use. If you need more support, or you want to go deeper into this and want somebody to guide you through it, I do have the Mind Gut Reconnection program, which is an 8-week program. And it's all about getting very specific with you and what your gut issues are. So we do the testing, we do the SIBO testing, and there's the option to upgrade to the microbiome testing. So the combination of both tests to fully understand your gut. I support you as a naturopath, as a therapist with the trauma work, and obviously the emotional support all the way through the 8 weeks as we start to change your life and look at your stresses and decrease your stress levels and the way you interface with stress. I teach you all about that in even more depth, and even more depth with the techniques on how to master your nervous system. And I support you and keep you accountable, big one, changing your life. If that's what your body wants, it's a change. So what does it look like? So it's 8 weeks. We do the microbiome testing, like I said. You have the option. The SIBO test is part of it, but if you want to go the Rolls-Royce version and do the microbiome testing on top of that, you can absolutely do that. There are consultations. We have our initial consultation, which is 60 minutes, where you get that beautiful, yet slightly annoying health questionnaire that you have to do at home and send to me so I can understand your body, and then we can get together for an hour and talk about you and your life and where you've been, where you want to go, and how we do this. And that's the initial consultation for an hour. Then we have catch-ups through. We have 3 45-minute consults all the way through on this 8-week program. There's supplementation involved. You know, the supplements that work best with my IBS patients are part of the program as well. There may be, you know, the need for things up on top of that, and that's at an extra cost. But that, you know, obviously we can discuss that. But there are some general supplementation that works for probably 90% of people with IBS. You go on as part of the program while we're making the changes, because they have huge benefit for you. And there's also a 6-week nervous system mastery course. So this is a weekly online, for 6 weeks in a row, online meeting. That's where we go through my course that I've been teaching for probably 5-6 years now, mindfulness meditation breathwork course. So it goes very, very deep into the human stress response and nervous system, even more than what we've done today. That's just touching the surface, honestly, and gets you to really understand what's going on, and more importantly, what to do about it. So we go very, very deep into breath work, into mindfulness, and meditation, the main, most powerful tools for dealing with stress. And we learn how to do it properly. You know, there's a lot of fluff out there when it comes to this, but the way that I teach it, you get a very, very in-depth understanding, which is important. So it builds value in the practice. So you actually want to do it, and you understand the mechanics of it and what's going on within your mind, within your body. And then we keep each other accountable, because we meet every week in a Zoom meeting with everyone, and we discuss, you know, our challenges, our successes, and we go through the content for each week. And there's homework each week, which is the meditation and the breathing practices that change up every week. We start with just a little bit of meditation and breath work, like 10 minutes at the start, but by the end, I guarantee you'll be able to meditate for 45 minutes straight. Some people, when they hear that, they go, yeah, good one. No chance. I can't switch this thing off. Have you been inside my mind? I guarantee you. I've had people in there that say, I can never do this. I won't be able to do this. And sure enough, by the end, 45 minutes, they can do it, and it changes everything. It's a game changer. And that's all part of the program. So if that's something, because it's a recording, please, if it is of interest to you, please reach out to me and ask me when my next cohort comes through. This is a recording, so I'm not going to put dates up because there'll be constant courses going on, and you'll just have to join the next one. So if you have questions about anything, please reach out, info@eddieenever.com. You can reach out to me through my website, to the contact page, or if you want to have a chat, I offer a free, absolutely free, no agenda whatsoever, 30-minute free phone call with me. It's an phone appointment. There's buttons all over the website. Just click one of them. It'll take you through to a booking page, and you can choose the availability that suits you, that's available. And we can have a chat. We can have a chat about this even more if you want, or if there's anything else. And you can just scope me out, and I can see if I want to work with you and if you're up for the challenge. Because it's not easy. That's the reality of it. It's going to mean changing your life. And if you're up for it, I'm up for it. But I'm going to keep you accountable. And so I don't want tire kickers, as harsh as that sounds. And you need to make sure that you resonate with me as well, because we're going to be in a partnership for 8 weeks. So we want to get along, and we want to work together towards your health goals. So any questions, please reach out. And apart from that, just thank you for sticking through the presentation. Hopefully it enriches your life and gives you more understanding on the way that your body works, your nervous system, and your gastrointestinal system works. Watch out for any future things and presentations that I've got. I've got one on autoimmunity that is very, very interesting. My podcast, and follow me on my socials. Okay. Thank you so much for listening.